Welcome to Future Learners, the show designed to empower students, parents, and educators. Join us as we explore the ever-evolving landscape of schooling, learning, and what it takes to succeed in today's world.
This episode is brought to you by Euka Future Learning, Australia's largest online, full-time education provider for pre-K through 12 students seeking a flexible, relevant, and meaningful education. Visit euka.edu.au today.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Future Learners. I am Brett Campbell, Chairman and CEO of Euka Future Learning, and I am joined today by my amazing co-host, founder and head of education, Ellen Brown. How are you doing today, Ellen?
Really well, thank you, Brett.
Excellent, great to hear. We are off to a flying start. I believe this is episode number 4, so we're well on our way here. I've been receiving some amazing feedback from our listeners, so thank you everyone for chiming in and giving us feedback as always. And to those who have, head over to iTunes and dropped us a 5-star review. We really appreciate it. And if you haven't, don't worry, there's still time. You can head over there right now to iTunes or Spotify, YouTube, wherever you're tuning into this episode. And please drop us a review, drop us a 5-star. My mama taught me to be nice, so please be nice to us and drop us a 5-star review. It'll help us get this episode and this podcast and show out to many, many more people. And of course, make sure you share this episode with anyone you think would get value from it. So, Ellen, today we're going to speak about something that I'm quite excited about this topic. And interestingly enough, it's probably one of the biggest barriers of entry for many parents, especially when I'm speaking to parents or even friends who are parents, when we talk about the concept of homeschooling and learning and developing our children. One of the biggest topic points that come to mind when you say the word homeschooling or someone's homeschooling their children, the answer is, but how do they socialize? How do they get friends? And that's what we're going to unpack today. So super excited to discuss that with you. I'm going to hand over to you to set us off. Let's go. Well, when it comes to socialization, obviously you've been exposed to this for over a decade now as it pertains to homeschooling itself. I know and I'm sure you've had many, many conversations with parents over those years and consistently dispelling the myth of, homeschooling is actually arguably better for socialization in many aspects. And that's what we're going to aim to unpack as well today. So what are your thoughts, Ellen? Let's dive into this.
Look, I'm also really excited to talk about this today because it's one of those things where when you say, you hear parents say, I'm a bit worried that the kids won't be socialized. It stems from a myth that homeschoolers sit at home. First of all, so homeschoolers are always out and about and they've got lots of interactions that we can go into. But before we even go into what the homeschoolers are doing, just having a quick look at socialization in the school itself and why parents might think that that's actually a huge benefit to children. So I'm sure if you're thinking back to your own schooling, Brett, you mentioned before that talking was one of those things you were always getting in trouble for. And socialization in school, often it's the very reason why people are leaving school. So things like bullying and mental health issues and even self-esteem issues and things like that. We can all think back to our school days. There's a bit of Lord of the Flies that goes on sometimes. And sometimes as a teacher, it's the luck of the draw. You'll have a great class of kids that get on really well and there isn't that one person causing a problem. And then the next year you'll have a class of kids that are just very, very, have a difficult time together. And some kids are inevitably at the bottom of the heap when it comes to even the social skills that they have going into the classroom. So school socialization, it can be great if you're lucky.
Mm-hmm. And where I was going with that was the starting point, because you've hit the nail on the head, and it comes down to every individual, and this is the beauty of being a human, right, is every individual is effectively unique in their own nature. However, there are commonalities and similarities in how groups of people socialize and how they can get the most bang for buck or the best benefit out of socialization. Because socialization isn't just hanging around with your friends. It's one aspect of it, right? And when you said what it was like for me back at school, very interesting. And I know a lot of parents would be able to relate to this. And I actually said this yesterday afternoon. I was talking to a journalist who's doing a story about us in Euka. And, one of the topics that I broached with him was, socialization, and how a lot of our families are actually, I would argue, are having greater levels of socialization. But then I had to define to him what socialization meant in that aspect. It's like, is this form of socialization equipping you to be a better person and a better human in the world as you move forward, right? Is it instilling the values and the beliefs that your family want to instill in you, right? Because socialization by osmosis of just being around lots of people can also be a very, very bad thing. When I was at school, I only did some bad things at school because I wanted to try and fit in with those bad kids, and I knew what I was doing was wrong, but I was like, I feel like I need to do it. So I peer pressured myself essentially because I wanted to be a part of that, but even though I knew that it wasn't. So the value of, and this isn't homeschooling versus schooling either. I don't want this to come across to anyone listening that, because I went through the schooling system, right? You went through the schooling system, and we get schooling is an amazing system for many, many children, but it's also not. And it's a good opportunity for us to really look at the opposite sides of what each of these areas mean, right? Do you get the opportunity to be exposed to a larger cohort of potential friends going to a school? Yeah, potentially, because you might be at a school where there's 500, 600, 700, 2,000, 3,000, depending on the size of the school. I was thrusted into a class. We had about 500 students in our school, so not a big school by all means. But we had our 30 people in a class, and because I was a bit of a class clown, I ended up getting on with a lot of people on a surface level, but I really only had, say, 3 or 4 friends that I would ever invite to my house, right, to come and spend time at my house. So that's the definition, I think, of their socialization, of building strong relationships with like-minded friends. And then there's exposure. I think we could debate a lot today about how important or how much value is there to exposure of something. I definitely think there are positive elements of being exposed to forms of social interaction, but then there's also a lot of social interaction that happens at school that, as a parent now, I'd be like, you know what, my daughter doesn't need to be exposed to that at all. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd also say, Brett, that when you're looking at friendships that are developed in an atmosphere where we're all the same age, we don't necessarily have anything in common except the same teacher or that we're in the same school. Like, as adults, when we're picking our friends, we pick people that have got values that are similar, with interests that are similar, and we don't actually ever say, well, how old are you first? Before we be friends with people as adults. Our friends come from all different ages with things in common, and that our personalities gel well together. And that can be one of the challenges where you'll have a child, and we've seen this so many times at Euka, where you'll have a child that, say, didn't necessarily fit in at school in the classroom, and yet they flourish in the homeschool environment because they've got friends who they've got hobbies with or sports with, or they're working part-time and they're developing friendships at work. And so they're choosing friendships based on how that helps them in their personal life, rather than just that we happen to sit next to each other and be the same age.
Yeah, and you had a number of really important areas to double tap on there. And again, when I look through my lens of schooling and growing up in my friends group, was very different to my nephews who are about 21 at the moment, their friends group. And I was talking to someone the other day, I was like, I only had, that 3 to 4 really close friends that I would take away on camping trips and holidays with my family, and I'd go on holidays with them and we'd stay the night at each other's house and so forth. I had a lot of other friends that, we'd connect with and we could hang out with during the day or something, but I think there's levels to friendships, right, and levels to socialization. And And even to this day, I probably only have half a dozen really true friends that I'd, invite over and I'd trust to look after Ayla, and because there's that level of it. But again, talk to a lot of people. But when it comes to, for me, choosing or where a lot of my friends really came from, it came from those sporting endeavors, the extracurricular activities that I did. So a couple of my best friends didn't even go to my school. Interestingly enough, I met them through cricket. So we had a commonality of cricket. We'd play cricket every Saturday morning. We'd do a training on a Thursday afternoon. I'd spend like an hour and a half with that person during the week, but have far greater friendship with that person than I would with the 25 other people that I'd sit in a class with for 7 hours a day with, right? So when parents and prospective parents who are seeking a potential alternative, online learning, homeschooling, future learning, as we like to call it, it's that old belief that, we're not going to get the level of socialization or the friendships that they need. But the reality is right now, I could name off as many fingers I've got on my hand, different areas where kids can socialize, right? There's clubs upon clubs upon clubs. There's even online communities where you can connect with people. I mean, we could talk about a number of them here, but that in itself, when you actually break it down and go, is that actually true though? Like, is the statement that how would my child socialize? Is that a real true statement? Or they won't get the level of socialization is probably a better term to put it as, no, my child won't get the level of socialization if they do at home online learning. I would absolutely call bull dust on that and say, well, what about this? Is that actually true? Because even in my era where we didn't have the internet and the ability to connect with anyone around the world, right, I would have the majority of my friends in sports clubs, rugby, cricket, golf. And the beauty of that is they'd all be different types of people too, because a lot of my friends who I met at golf were very different than my friends who were rugby oriented, right? Now, I know what some parents might be going, well, it sounds like you were into sports, Brett, and a lot of them. I was like, sports was something that I really loved and gravitated to. I said, I think in the last episode, the 3 subjects I was really good at school was woodwork, physical education, which is PE, sports, and lunch, right? And now it's so much easier even, and there's so much more opportunity for students to be able to connect with other students, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And what we're seeing now is a real tipping point in the number of students that are homeschooling and future learning students, which means that really there isn't a town that doesn't have a group of homeschoolers, and they're very creative people. They'll get together and they'll say, look, we've got, I happened to have talked to a mum just yesterday, have a group of friends and their kids are right into sewing, and they've organized the sewing group. And then there's another group who are really into mountain biking. They get together every week, and now they're joining the inter-school mountain bike clubs, under the Euka banner. So and I guess that's where having a large community like we have is important, because there's not a day goes by that we don't see a family saying, look, we're new, we're in this area, who else is in this area? And then they can connect together and make sure they've got kids that are gelling together. So there's lots of opportunities, within not being a sport person, but within the homeschooling community, because it's a very big community. But then just out there in the world, there's so many opportunities out there that we're seeing kids being part of and really enjoying.
There's over, again, the data can be analysed a little bit deeper, but there's over 50,000 from our understanding at the very least of students being homeschooled in Australia, and that's growing year on year on year. And with the adoption of social media and with the adoption of COVID and the adoption of at-home working now, there's a lot of remote working. The world's moving very quickly, and there are more and more. And I see it even with a couple of friends reached out to me just recently going, hey, I'd love to know more about what you guys do with Euka, because we've been homeschooling our kids, and they literally, this family travels like 6 months of the year. And I seen a post from this specific person last night on Facebook, and he goes, today's lesson was brought to you by like the Rome. What was the name of it? He go, it was outside the Colosseum. He goes like, today's lesson is brought to you by the Rome Colosseum, right? And his family's there, and his history lesson, and he's teaching his children about the history of Rome. And I mean, no better immersion than that, right? But this kid, they socialize, they're in sports clubs, they meet other traveling families. And so there's so much opportunity that it almost becomes in many ways, a redundant point to make. And this is why, again, it's beautiful to be able to record this episode, because it's when parents hear this and families hear this, they're like, yeah, actually, yeah, socialization is probably more advantageous because, and this is why I think it's probably more advantageous, is you can actually control the level of socialization that your child is exposed to. Now, I'm not saying micromanage exactly how they spend their time, but it is important to know as a parent what your child's being exposed to and how they are. And I mean, we talk about Ayla a little bit in these episodes already. I think she's going to be a recurring theme. I can't stop talking about her. I'm deeply in love with my daughter. She's unbelievable. And you know, she's 2.5, but we've got friends group. There's like 4 people on our street who there must have been something in the water, who all had a baby around the similar time. You know, they all go and hang out with each other now. They're getting socialization there. She goes to swimming club. She gets to meet a different group of people at her swimming club, splashing around, jumping around the water, and, you know, going off to little gymnastics and gets to roll on the floor. And it's like, she's getting lots, if anything, you know, probably more socialization than what's really required, which I want to ask you this question. And I think this is how long's a piece of string, but how much socialization do you think is an adequate amount of socialization?
Oh, I think that's going to be different for every person, because there's introverts and extroverts, and we all require something different. But I think that parents are now saying to themselves, and I think you can't ignore the problems we've got with mental health, and certainly in younger and younger children right now. And what's happening is, you know, they're going to school for their socialization. If that isn't a positive place for them and they don't have those friendships that are important, they'll come home and their socialization will be online. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. The kids are way more social and have a lot more friends than I ever had, because they're connecting with a lot of people. But the social skills about, you know, body language and listening and empathy and being able to look people in the eye, those sorts of things can't be discounted. And often when a child's at school, you think, well, they've been at school, they've socialized all day, and now they're at home, I can hear them, they're playing, I can hear them, you know, talking to friends and things like that online. But the real interaction, you know, one-on-one with people that you really enjoy and that really, you know, feed your soul, I suppose, those kinds of things are really important. And so depending on your child, like knowing your child is really important. But I loved what you said, Brett, when you carefully said, you know, you can control, or you can maneuver the situation. Like, how many parents have thought to themselves, I know that particular child's not great for my child, but they're in the same class at school and there's nothing I can do about it. You know, I often think of a parent as a little bit like, you know, a stake that you put next to a small tree that's growing. And, you know, without that, all of a sudden you've got no stability. But if you can be part of their life and help them choose friends as they're growing up, and you know, you're part of that discussion about, oh, how do you feel with that person? Because they may be drawn to someone who's quite, you know, not a positive influence, but you can start to see that and you can then foster, you know, relationships that you can see are really beneficial for your child. And that's not about control. That's about really giving them great guidance as they begin to choose. And as they step into those teenage years and make decisions themselves, they've had that real stability around them.
It's that adage of being a mentor for your child, right? And yeah, another question we often get asked is, does that mean I have to teach my child if I homeschool them? So, well, yeah, you need to be the leader of mentoring them through that. Now, you don't need to be a teacher, right? Because a lot of what a child's learning in the early years, and we did a whole episode of this previous to this one on the early years, and the reality is that if you can be the guide and help instill within your child the values of what it means to be a good human being, I mean, that is the best starting point that we can make. And you can have a lot more impact and control over how that is delivered. Because, as an example, Ayla goes to swimming club, and there's generally about 3-4 kids in the class. Now, keep in mind they're 2.5 years old, right? So anything can happen. Ayla takes her swimming like unbelievably serious, right? So she's a very playful child, but when she's trying to learn something, she just fixates in on it and she wants to master it, right? So she's in swimming and she's listening to the teacher, and the other class is full of like 3 boys, and they're jumping around being boys, right? Having fun, jumping off the mat and jumping back on and not listening to the teacher, which is all good. But there was another child that joined the class, and this child literally did not like swimming, did not like anything, and would just scream on the top of his lungs, and cause, disruption in the class. And it would make Ayla get upset every time, and she was just getting upset. She wasn't able to do her swimming. So and knowing that now being a parent, prior to being a parent, I would have been like, man, tell your kid to shut up, right? But obviously, I've been smacked in the nose many a time to go, Brett, what you know now, I apologize to every parent that I ever said anything potentially untoward about. And we moved Ayla into a different class because we're like, you know what, we can't have her breaking down every time. I understand that this child's going through something that's not great for him, obviously, and not a great experience for his mother either, sitting on the side of the pool going, oh my God, I don't know what to do, right? But we had the ability to go, well, do we keep her in class or do we make a decision to put her in a different environment? And that's happening more and more and more in school these days. Like, you can't just go to your school and go, hey, I want to move my kid to a different class. And like at the flip of the switch, that's going to occur, right? There's lots of byproducts that come along with that. And you might be able to do it once, max maybe twice, but then it's like, okay, now you have to find a different school, right? And all of those things are big things for a child to have to go through and experience, right? Especially when it comes to the topic of bullying, right? Like, bullying back in my day was you'd go and have a fight behind the pool sheds and then it'd all be over, right? And it was just basically a peacocking event of who's the toughest kid in school. And, there was a little bit more bullying that went on. And maybe when we talk about the bullying episode, I'll share my experiences around that. But that's something you definitely don't want to have your child exposed to. I've heard a lot of fathers say, they need to be exposed to it because that gets them tough. I'm like, I don't know if I truly believe that to be the case. Now, there's levels of experiences that I would want, my children to be exposed to then know what to avoid. But when you're in a position where you really can't avoid it, like, I've got friends who their kids literally terrified to go to school because they don't want to walk this way because they know that there's this kid here who's going to stop them and pick on them and just make life the living hell for them, right? Which is, and now that it's becoming more and more mainstream conversation and there's more awareness around it, the word you said a little bit earlier and is around that level of mental health. It's what happens to our children in these younger years and through school and through high school is what's going to craft them in many ways on how they're going to be as an adult, which then in turn, how are they going to be as a parent?
And I would also say, it's not about trying to say, when you're homeschooling, your child won't be exposed to this or that, because they're all online, and bullying doesn't end when you're not in school. There's no doubt about it. But you do have the opportunity to foster really positive relationships and opportunities in the day that when you're homeschooling, that can counteract that. I mean, like you said, grit is one of those things that we all need to have. But when you hear people say, they should be able to handle this or should be able to handle that, and you think, well, hold on, we wouldn't expect an adult in the workplace to handle that. Like, some of the things that go on that I hear from parents, I think to myself, if that happened in a workplace, there'd be real consequences, but we seem to turn a blind eye because it's children. So or we're in a situation where there's nothing we can do about it. So bullying is going to be part of our kids' life, and so is negative influences and peer pressure, because we're living in that digital age where they're exposed to those things. So we're certainly not going to go Amish here and say, well, let's throw away the phones and disconnect. But it's about saying, well, let's make sure that we're giving them those positive experiences. We actually, when you are homeschooling, as a parent myself, I know that I can say, you know what? I know that we need to go and spend time with these people or those kids, or go and do this activity. I have those opportunities to balance out and to provide them with the skills that they need to handle it when they're facing some challenging things online.
And that right there is the decision that parents need to make. And this comes as a byproduct of deciding to, future learn your children, right? To take them out of the system and to embark on a different method and a different journey. Is that part of that decision is you must take on, and I'll say this word very loosely, you must take on the extra burden of having to play more of a significant role in their development and their education and what they are and are not exposed to. Now, for parents or for families who are lucky enough to have a family member at home, where the wife or the husband at home, to be able to take on that role, that's amazing. Now, I also understand that there's lots of families where both parties are working and the only option they really have in their specific mind at this current moment is, I've got to send them to school. And, that's obviously an unfortunate situation, especially if you would much prefer to be able to, homeschool and teach them in a different manner. But I would also still encourage you, even if that is your situation and circumstance, is that as we start to really get deep into the podcast here and have these conversations, there's lots of little things that you could just implement immediately in your everyday life whilst you're even working full-time, both parties, etc., to just pay a little bit more attention and have conversations with your children about how are they actually socializing. Like, get to know the friends and who they're talking about. Get to know that their friends, parents, and family. Make an effort to seek out. If they're like, oh yeah, I've been playing with Barry today at school. So, okay, who's Barry? Oh, he does da. Okay, have you? Where does Barry live? Do you know what Barry's parents do? Okay, well, next time you want to go and, hey, where's Barry's parents? Let's go. Hey, have a conversation. Get to know if Barry's parents and you have similar values, right? Because that's the other part is.
Sorry, I was going to say that's exactly right. I was just going to say that's exactly right, Brett. The idea of saying, even being really proactive and saying, okay, the year has started. Let's send something out so a bunch of these kids that your child's hanging out with, that we all go somewhere, meet somewhere with the families, organize a day out on a Saturday and say, look, we're coming here. Anyone else who wants to go? It gives you the opportunity of getting to know parents and also getting to know the kids that your child is spending time with. And then you can make very strategic decisions about who you want to invite over for after school and who you might decide to not invite over after school, because you can start to see those interactions with your child and the group. And, it used to be you could invite everybody's child to your house and then parents would be like, yeah, just go home. It's not necessarily the way when you don't know parents anymore, because they all hop on the school bus and so you never meet the parents. So trying to organize something at a public place like a park or a theme park or anything like that, it might be a little bit of hassle and organization, but it'll be so worth it so that you actually can keep in touch with the parents as well and know that what you're being told is what is actually happening. Those kinds of things, once they become teenagers, you kind of lose a bit of that insight.
Yeah, I remember when I had a group of friends at high school, and I'd always ask Mum, hey, can I go and stay at their house? Can I go and stay at his house? Can I stay at his house? And she'd be like, yep. But there was this one kid who was a friend of mine. She would never let me go and stay. Like, it always felt like something, oh, no, we can't because of this, because of that, because of that. I'm like, I never understood why. And I spoke with her about it a few years ago. I was like, why didn't you ever let me go and stay at this person's house? And she goes, well, if you knew the family and what they were into and involved in and this and that. And I was like, oh, right, okay. So this comes back to, again, just playing a bigger part in your child's development, regardless of the situation where you're at. It doesn't take a lot to be curious and know who you're to your very best. And this comes from trust as well, instilling trust in those early years and being a voice that your kids can come and tell you anything. That's the ideal for a parent, to be able to have open, honest, empathetic, caring conversations with your children, so that when they do get a little bit older, they're not, hiding who they're hanging out with, or they're saying, oh, I'm going to Jessica's house, and next minute they're off to Samantha's house and they're down the park smoking and doing this and that and causing a riot or whatever it might be. I'm sure they do worse things than that now. But it really comes back to that, just being curious about, and I love your idea of, organize, be that proactive parent. Be the proactive parent to organize a hangout at the park. You're going to quickly identify the families that gel with you or not. And you just don't invite those families you don't want to hang out with again, but that there is, because here's the beautiful part as well, is I've learned a lot growing up, and there's a couple of families that I really pay homage to for this, where they taught me so many things that my parents weren't able, like my mother and stepdad weren't able to teach me. So there's so much value in you aligning yourself, and you'll do this right now. Like, you'll be listening to this going, we've got friends, we've got couple friends, or we've got friends with similar kids around similar ages, and you'll naturally gravitate to it. It's like what happens when you go to like a live workshop or a live 3-day event or something. You'll naturally gravitate towards this similar like-minded people, because it's just what happens, right? It's just energy attracts energy, and you connect there. But you're doing it already without really knowing it. Take it another step further and go, you know what? Why do we like hanging around with this family? Like, what about this family is it that is attracting us to this? And why do we let our children hang out with these children? Like, what are the qualities of that child or of your friend's child that you would love to rub off on your own children, right? And vice versa. And what qualities of these parents would you like to rub off onto your child, so that when you know your children are hanging out with their friends at their parents' house, or they're going away camping for the weekend, that not only that, look, they're safe, nothing's bad's going to happen, but your child's going to come back a better child.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it goes both ways, doesn't it? And that's why it's really important to get to know the children that your kids are spending time with. If they are in school, I can't recommend more that in the last part of primary school, before they hit high school, that you get into that situation and that habit, or even the beginning of high school, year 7, say, let's get a catch up together and let's meet other year 7 families or year 8 families. Because it doesn't take long before you do get squeezed out of those opportunities, because the kids start taking on more of the role of organising things together. So making sure you get that established early, because they're going to be going through school with these same people. So having those established while the kids are still young enough that it doesn't seem weird that you're talking to his mum or her mum or something like that is really important before it's just a window of opportunity. That it is a real privilege to be part of shaping those relationships and making sure that, that, and when you've got a child that's a really, that has got those qualities and they're, sometimes you'll find that other parents or if they're in school, sometimes they'll be seated next to somebody who's really disagreeable. And like you said about the swimming lessons, it can be a real difficult thing if you've got a child that's just got a real sweet personality and that's always a situation where they're being put with someone who they're supposed to rub off on, And so even if they're in school or they're not in school, you want to make sure that you're giving them opportunities to gain something from somebody that is a positive part of their life, just like we do.
I got asked to leave high school, right? So I didn't finish high school because my last year of high school, I was just like, I think I'm done with this, to be fair. I felt like, I got what I needed from school. I had no ambition to do university. which funnily enough, many years later, I ended up doing a stint at uni, which is for another day. But I got asked to leave high school because I was that disturbing kid in my class, right? I was able to get my work done, but then all I wanted to do was talk to my mates. And at the time, I didn't know I was slowing them down or disturbing them to get their work finished. I just wanted to have a chat, Now, in hindsight, I could look back at that and go, well, the teacher should have probably given me some different tasks or some more tasks to do that kept me busy. Because when I had something that kept me busy, I was engrossed in it. I loved it. I loved learning. But as soon as I got to the end, I'm like, okay, what next? In my English class, this is hilarious. Geez, I haven't talked about this one for many years, but in my English class, it got to a point where I'd walk into the English class and my teacher goes, Brett, your desk is out there. I'm like, well, what do you mean my desk? And she pointed to the hallway door, and she literally put my desk out in the hallway door, and I would have to sit and do my English work in a desk with this long hallway and no one else walking in. It was just a ghost town. But here's what it did. I'd finish my work in 20 minutes and I'd be popping my head through the glass door and trying to make my friends laugh, right? So what it was for me was too much socialization was probably a bit of a negative effect on me in many ways, because all I wanted to do was socialize. But thought I'd share that one. I don't know. You know what? The great outcome of that, though, Ellen, was with English for that year. There was one girl in our class who was an absolute wizard, and she got top of class. I ended up getting second in class. The teacher was like, "How?" I'm like, "What?" So just goes to show there's lots of methods to trying to achieve an end outcome, and I think what it really wraps up in is that we're all unique. We all have a different way of learning. We all have a different way of developing, and we all have different ways of communicating, and the ability for us as parents to be able to help shape and construct that is absolutely priceless for our children. So on that note, Ellen, I'm going to wrap this episode up. Been a pleasure speaking with you again, and can't wait for the next episode.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Brett. No, it's an important one, but just to know that socialization is certainly not something that's lacking when students are doing homeschooling. The opportunities are endless, and once you join a homeschooling group that's near you, you're really having to turn down invitations to do things, which is a nice way for it to be.
Absolutely. So on that note, if you've enjoyed this episode and you've gotten value from it, even an incremental mini piece of value, please share this episode with someone that you think would also get value from it. And as always, head over to any of the devices and to where you're listening to this and leave us a review. A 5-star would be nice. We love the 5 stars and appreciate each and every one of you providing us feedback, liking, sharing, commenting, all of those things that you can do. It helps us get a lot more excited to keep bringing you these episodes. And we've got a list a mile long of topics that we want to cover. And if you have any topics that are burning a hole in your pocket that you would like Ellen and myself to tackle, please let us know about it. Leave us a comment and we will endeavor to do our best to absolutely provide. So thank you again and see you on the next one.